In the winter of 1986, the sun did not rise over the Finnmark Plateau for 63 consecutive days. Not behind clouds, not obscured by snow, simply absent. The Arctic winter does not dim the light. It abolishes it entirely. What remains is something soldiers describe not as darkness, but as pressure, a physical weight that settles behind the eyes and stays there. The temperature along Norway's northeastern border with the Soviet Union averaged minus 31 degrees Celsius in January of that year. Wind chill from the Barents Sea could drive the effective temperature to minus 50. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in under 4 minutes. Diesel generators seize. Rifle bolts crack. Radio batteries discharge in under an hour. In those conditions, the Norwegian Army's garrison Porsanger, known by its Norwegian designation as Garnison Porsanger, or simply GPSG, maintained a continuous forward presence along the eastern edge of NATO's northern flank. Their mission was straightforward, at least on paper. Watch the border, maintain awareness, report Soviet activity. They were not alone. In the weeks surrounding the massive NATO exercise known as Operation Anchor Express, elements of the United States Marine Corps, specifically attached reconnaissance units from the 4th Marine Amphibious Brigade, were embedded with Norwegian forces, learning the land, learning to survive it. Official records describe the period between January 14th and January 21st, 1986, as routine border surveillance operations. No engagements. No significant intelligence events. No casualties. The men who were on the ground that week describe it differently. What you are about to hear has been reconstructed from field journals, declassified patrol logs, and the testimony of 4 veterans who agreed to speak, some for the first time, about what happened on the Varanger Peninsula during those 7 nights. If you value real-world mysteries recovered from the fringes of conflict, stay with me. To understand what happened on the Varanger Peninsula in January 1986, you need to understand what that border meant. Finnmark is Norway's northernmost county, a vast, largely unpopulated plateau of permafrost, frozen lakes, and coastline that runs directly alongside the Soviet Kola Peninsula. Just across that border lay Murmansk, the largest city north of the Arctic Circle, and the home port of the Soviet Northern Fleet, the most powerful naval concentration in the world at that time. Nuclear submarines, ballistic missile cruisers, enough tonnage to reshape the Atlantic. NATO war planners had a specific fear about this region. In the event of a Soviet conventional push into Western Europe, Finnmark would be among the first territories taken, not because of its strategic value in isolation, but because its airfields, its coastline, and its fjords would allow Soviet forces to outflank NATO's maritime choke points in the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap. Control Finnmark and you control the resupply route between North America and a Europe at war. This was why American Marines were there. Following years of acknowledged underperformance in Arctic conditions, the Marine Corps had been quietly, methodically rebuilding its cold weather warfare capability through the late 1970s and early 1980s. By 1986, they were running alongside Norwegian units in exercises designed to validate that they could survive, move, and fight in a landscape that had historically defeated every non-native force that attempted to occupy it. Operation Anchor Express brought approximately 20,000 troops from 8 nations into the high north that winter. It was the largest cold-weather military exercise conducted since the Second World War. But the exercise itself is not the story. The story is what happened on the margins, in the gaps between the formal training objectives, out on the border patrols in the dark. The Varanger Peninsula stretches eastward from the Norwegian mainland like a clenched fist pointed at Russia. It is extraordinarily flat by Scandinavian standards. None of the drama of fjords or mountain passes that characterize the Norwegian interior. Just tundra, rock, wind. And in January, a fog that rolls in off the Barents Sea without warning, reducing visibility to single-digit meters within minutes. The Norwegian soldiers at GPSG had a term for this fog. They called it the half-take, the sea smoke. They were not afraid of it exactly, but they were careful around it. Their grandfathers had been careful around it too, for a reason. Corporal David J. Rett, then 23 years old, attached from Alpha Company, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, kept a field journal throughout his deployment to Norway. What follows is drawn from that journal, cross-referenced with his verbal account, recorded in 2019. You have to understand what the cold does to your thinking first. You're not scared of the enemy by the end of the second week. You're scared of the environment. The environment is what's trying to kill you constantly. Enemy contact would almost be a relief. At least that's something you've trained for. You haven't trained for what -40 does to your brain after 14 days of no sunlight. On the evening of January 14, 1986, Rhett was assigned to a static observation post designated OP Kilo 3, positioned on the eastern edge of the plateau overlooking a frozen inlet of the Varanger Fjord. His team consisted of himself, a Norwegian liaison NCO named Sergeant Torgeir Mohn, and a second American Marine, Lance Corporal Wells, who was operating the Teams and /PVS-5 night vision goggles. It was quiet, not the comfortable kind. The wind had stopped around 2,200 hours, which almost never happened out there. The wind was constant, you used it to orient yourself. When it stopped, everything went wrong feeling. No wind, no dogs. There was a Sami settlement about 4 clicks south and you could usually hear their dogs at night. Nothing. Wells said something about it. Said it reminded him of. He said it was like the air had been sucked out of a room. Then the radio started. The patrol frequency, a restricted NATO tactical net, began emitting a low rhythmic interference at approximately 2,240 hours. Not static. Something more structured than static. A pattern. Mohn was on the handset. He looked at me and I could see his face in the NVG bloom, green obviously, and he had this expression I can't really describe. Like he recognized something he didn't want to recognize. He tried 3 times to reach Porsanger on the alternate frequency. Nothing. We had comms 40 minutes earlier. No weather event. No mechanical reason for it. What Rhett describes next is documented in his journal in considerable detail. Unusual for a field log, which typically limits itself to grid squares and sitrep shorthand. The sound on the radio it sounded like breathing. That's the only way I can put it. Slow, regular, like something was holding the transmit button and just breathing into it. We were on a secure frequency. You don't get civilian bleed through. You don't get wildlife. At approximately 2,310 hours, Lance Corporal Wells, using the NVGs, reported movement on the ice of the frozen inlet below OP Kilo 3. He handed me the goggles and pointed. I got them on and swept the inlet. At first I didn't see anything. Then Wells said, "Look at the far edge where the ice meets the shore." And I looked, and there was something there. A shape, tall, vertical, standing at the waterline in the half-take, the sea fog, just standing. It wasn't moving. It was just there. And the thing is, and I know how this sounds, the thing is that when I put the goggles down and looked with the naked eye, I could see the fog and I could make out a kind of presence in it, a density, a column of something that was darker than the fog around it. But when I put the goggles back up, the thermal return was wrong. A human being shows white hot in those conditions. An animal, a bear even, shows clearly. This was almost ambient, like it had no temperature. Like it was exactly as cold as the air around it. Rhett radioed the sighting to Mohn, who attempted again to reach Porsanger base. No response on primary. No response on alternate. The radio had not failed. The indicator lights were nominal, but nothing was transmitting out and nothing was coming in. The radio intercept logged at 2,317 hours, entered later from memory by both Rhett and Mohn in their respective after-action reports, reads as follows.
Ga tilbake. Ga tilbake til havet. Go back. Go back to the sea.
When communications were restored at 2,324 hours, Rhett called in the contact. The duty officer at Porsanger base logged the report. In the official record, it is classified as a probable Soviet electronic warfare test. A plausible explanation given the proximity of the border and the sophisticated signals intelligence infrastructure known to operate out of the Kola Peninsula. Sergeant Mohn did not accept that explanation. He had heard those words before, not over a radio. He had heard them from his grandmother. Torgeir Mohn was from Vadso, a coastal town near the tip of the Varanger Peninsula, population under 5,000, where the Norwegian and Sami cultures have overlapped for centuries. He had grown up with the stories that coastal Norwegians have told for 1,000 years about the sea and those who did not return from it. Central among those stories is the Draugen. The word is Old Norse, derived from Draugr the undead. But the Draugen of the northern Norwegian coast is a specific creature, distinct from the inland ghost traditions of Scandinavia. It is the spirit of a sailor lost at sea, someone who died far from shore without rights, without return. The Draugen is described in consistent terms across a millennium of testimony. Massive, pale, draped in seaweed, rowing a shattered half-boat through the fog. Its cry, a sound described as somewhere between a human scream and the groan of ice under pressure, is heard before storms, before drownings, before the sea takes someone it has been waiting for. And it speaks. In the oldest versions of the legend, the Draugen calls to those near the water. It tells them to go back. Ga tilbake til havet. Go back to the sea. Moen did not report this context in his official after-action assessment. He was a professional soldier on a NATO border patrol, and he understood exactly how that conversation would go. He told the researcher collecting these accounts in 2022 that he simply wrote, "Probable electronic warfare event, no further contact," and moved on. But he also said this, that he had been stationed at GPSG for 3 years, and that the January 14th incident was not the first time something had happened on the Varanger Peninsula that he could not account for. In the winter of 1984, a 2-man Norwegian patrol designated Patrol Romeo 6, operating approximately 12 kilometers west of OP Kilo 3, reported the following to their duty officer upon returning to base. At 0115 hours, the patrol observed a series of impressions in the snow moving from the shoreline in a direction perpendicular to the coast. The impressions were consistent in spacing with a bipedal stride. They measured approximately 50 centimeters in length. The patrol followed the impressions for approximately 90 meters before the trail ceased. Not at a feature, not at a road, not at any natural obstruction. The impressions simply ended. No disturbance in the surrounding snow. No evidence of exit. The duty officer's log notes, investigated. No explanation identified. Probable animal track, species unknown. There are no animal species native to the Varanger Peninsula that leave a bipedal track 50 centimeters in length. A third account comes from the American side of the operation. Staff Sergeant Kevin Alderman, Weapons Platoon, attached to the Norwegian Northern Brigade during Anchor Express, was part of a CASEVAC coordination team working out of a forward operating base near Kirkens in late January 1986. In 2021, he agreed to describe an incident that he had reported informally to his platoon commander but had never entered into any official documentation. We were running the 240B through a function check around midnight, just maintenance, nothing tactical, when the guy on watch called me over to the perimeter. He was pointing at the tree line about 150 meters out. There's no tree line on most of that plateau, so this was a specific spot where the ground dropped and there was some stunted birch. He said there was something in there. I looked. I didn't see anything for about 30 seconds. Then I did. It was tall. Very tall. Standing between the trees, which were maybe 5-6 feet high. This thing was looking over them. Just watching. No thermal bloom. RGI issue thermals at the time weren't great in extreme cold, but they would pick up a man at that range without any problem. The screen showed ambient. Nothing. I put my hand on the radio to call it in and the radio died. Not interference. It just went dark. Completely. When I looked back at the tree line 30 seconds later, whatever was there was gone. The radio came back up the moment I stopped looking. 3 separate accounts. 3 separate locations. 3 separate years. All within a 40-kilometer stretch of the Varanger Peninsula. All featuring the same constellation of details. Radio failure at the moment of contact. An entity that produced no thermal signature, and a silence, a biological silence, the absence of the insects and animals that should have been there, preceding each event. In the folklore of the northern coast, that silence has a name. In Norwegian it is called the Dødsstillhet, the death quiet, the silence that comes before the Draugen calls. Military investigators, when pressed on these accounts decades later, offer 2 rational frameworks. The first is combat stress and perceptual degradation. Sleep deprivation at Arctic temperatures produces documented hallucinations after as few as 72 hours of disrupted sleep. By day 4 or 5 of a patrol cycle in those conditions, the human brain begins confabulating detail. What looks like a figure in fog may be a pressure ridge in the ice. What sounds like breathing on a radio is pareidolia imposed on electronic noise by a mind starved of sensory input. The second framework is Soviet active measures, a deliberate psychological operations campaign designed to demoralize NATO border troops. The KGB's operational capabilities on the Kola Peninsula were extensive, projecting sounds, manipulating low-power radio frequencies, even staging visual events along the border. All of these were within the documented capability of Soviet intelligence in 1986. Both explanations are reasonable. Neither of them fully accounts for what happened on the night of January 18th. January 18th, 1986. Day 5 of the border rotation. The temperature at the Varanger Peninsula had dropped to -37°C. A low-pressure system moving in from the Barents Sea was pushing the sea fog inland faster than forecast. Visibility on the plateau had degraded to approximately 20 meters by 2,100 hours. A four-man patrol, designation Patrol Kilo 7, was operating along the eastern sector of the border corridor. The team consisted of 2 Norwegian conscripts from GPSG, 1 Norwegian professional NCO, and Corporal Rhett, completing his second consecutive rotation on the peninsula. They were running a route they had covered twice before. They knew the ground. They did not return to the forward base at the scheduled 0200 hours the following morning. The duty officer at GPSG logged the missed check-in at 0215 hours and initiated a radio search of the patrol's last known grid squares. No response. The QRF, Quick Reaction Force, was stood up at 0300 hours and pushed out into the fog in 2 snowmobiles. They found Patrol Kilo 7 at approximately 0430 hours, approximately 3 kilometers east of their last plotted waypoint, closer to the Soviet border than their route should have taken them. All 4 men were present. All 4 were uninjured. All 4 were sitting in the snow in a rough circle, facing outward, weapons up, in complete silence. They had been in that position for an estimated 2 hours. Their radios were off, not malfunctioning. Switched off. Their NVGs had been removed and stowed. They were watching the fog with their bare eyes.
I know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like. But I'm telling you, we made a tactical decision to go dark. We couldn't hear each other on the radio. There was too much interference, and we made the call to go silent and hold position. That's doctrine. That's exactly what you're supposed to do when you've lost comms and you're not sure of your position.
That is doctrine. It is also exactly what the after-action report states. The patrol had become disoriented in the fog and had correctly halted, established a 360-degree perimeter, and waited for recovery. The after-action report does not mention what Rhett describes in his personal account.
We could hear it moving around us, outside the perimeter. We couldn't see it. The fog was complete, 0 visibility past maybe 10 feet, but we could hear it. A sound like something very heavy walking on the ice, but not a crunching sound, more like a groan, like the ice itself was registering something. It moved in a circle around us for, I don't know, maybe 40 minutes, maybe more, and then it stopped. When it stopped, the fog started to thin, and one of the Norwegian soldiers, the younger one, Eriksson, he started talking. Just talking quietly in Norwegian. Moan translated for me later. Eriksson was saying, "It's looking for the water. It's looking for the way back to the water. Don't move and it will find it." He wasn't scared when he said it. He sounded certain, like he knew.
The QRF arrived 18 minutes after the movement ceased. The fog cleared rapidly, unusually rapidly, the QRF sergeant noted in his own log, within the hour. By 0600 hours, visibility was restored to normal operational range. The Norwegian soldier, Private Arne Eriksson, 19 years old, from the coastal village of Berlevåg, 60 kilometers north of Vadsø, was administratively transferred to a base in southern Norway within the week. The official reason given was a family medical situation. His service record contains no further reference to the incident or to his time on the Varanger Peninsula. Corporal Rhett was rotated out of the Norwegian sector on January 22nd, 4 days ahead of schedule. His field journal was reviewed by his commanding officer and returned to him without comment. He kept it. There is one final detail. When the QRF located Patrol Kilo 7 and the team was recovered to the forward base, the duty officer conducted a standard equipment check. All weapons accounted for. All cold weather gear present. All comms equipment functioning. The radios came back up the moment the team was in motion. One item was anomalous. The patrol had been issued a set of N/PVS-5 NVGs, the same model Rhett had used 4 nights earlier at OP Kilo 3. The devices had been switched off and stowed in their cases as Rhett described. When the duty officer powered them back up for the check, the image intensifier tubes were burned. Not drained. Not malfunctioning in the conventional sense. Burned, overexposed, as though the tubes had been flooded with a level of light far beyond their operational range. The temperature that night had been -37. The polar night was complete. There had been no source of light on the Varanger Peninsula between 2100 and 0600 hours on January 18th to 19th, 1986. The duty officer logged the NVGs as equipment failure, cause undetermined. They were returned to the supply depot at Bardufoss and written off as frost damage. The complete patrol logs from the Varanger border sector for the period January 14th through January 21st, 1986, were archived through the Norwegian Defense Intelligence Staff. A request for access submitted by a researcher in 2018 was acknowledged and then met with a response stating that the relevant files had been transferred to a joint NATO archive under the classification protocols established by the 1980 Brussels Agreement. A second request, submitted to the NATO archive in 2019, received no reply. Corporal Rhett's after-action report exists in the public domain, a single-page summary submitted through Marine Corps channels and declassified in 2004. It contains no reference to the January 18th incident beyond the notation. Patrol Kilo 7, grid reference lost due to weather. Recovered 0430, no casualties, no contact. No contact. 2 words. A complete sentence. A closed file. What happened on the Varanger Peninsula in January 1986 has 4 possible explanations, and none of them are satisfying. The first, combat stress and sensory deprivation. After 72 hours or more in Arctic darkness at extreme temperatures, the human perceptual system degrades in documented, reproducible ways. Figures appear in fog that are not there. Sounds acquire patterns they do not possess. A patrol, exhausted and cold and operating at the edge of its cognitive limits, loses an hour and a half and later cannot fully account for what was lost. This happens. It happens in wars, in wilderness, in any environment that places prolonged and total stress on the nervous system. The second, Soviet psychological operations. The KGB's active measures programs along the Norwegian border were extensive and sophisticated. Manipulating radio frequencies, projecting sounds across the tundra, even staging visual events designed to demoralize and disorient NATO personnel. All of this was within the documented operational repertoire of Soviet intelligence in the 1980s. If the goal was to make Western soldiers afraid of the dark, of their own radios, of the fog itself, then whatever happened on the Varanger Peninsula succeeded completely, for at least a handful of men for at least one winter. The third, something that existed before the war, before NATO, before the Soviet Union, before the border lines drawn across that flat, ancient tundra by people who had never seen it in January darkness. The Sami people of Finnmark are among the oldest continuous inhabitants of the European Arctic, and they have known for as long as their memory reaches that certain stretches of that coastline are places where the boundary between the living and whatever comes after is thinner than elsewhere. They do not use the word Draugen. They have their own words, but the meaning converges. The fourth we simply do not know. The files are sealed. The men have mostly moved on. Arne Eriksson, the 19-year-old private from Berlevåg who sat in the snow and said, "Don't move and it will find the water," has never given an interview and has declined all contact requests. Corporal Rhett, now in his early 60s and living in the American Midwest, ended his 2019 interview with a single observation that he asked the researcher to record but not to challenge.
I've been in some places. I've seen some things. I've never been sure of what I saw that week, and I've made peace with not being sure. What I am sure of is this: whatever was out there in that fog was not afraid of us. Not our weapons, not our radios, not our NVGs. It was moving through that landscape the way it had always moved through it, like we were the ones who didn't belong there. Like we were the temporary thing.
The border between Norway and Russia still runs along the eastern edge of the Varanger Peninsula. Norwegian and NATO forces still patrol it. The half-take, the sea smoke, still rolls in from the Barents Sea without warning in the depths of January. Young soldiers in white camouflage still spend days in the dot still hit, the death quiet, listening to the absence of sound and watching for movement in the fog. War makes many kinds of ghosts. It leaves them in the soil, in the frequency spectrum, in the memories of those who survive it. But the coast of Finnmark was haunted long before any war reached it. And if the oldest stories can be trusted at all, it will be haunted long after the last patrol has come in from the cold. The question is not whether something was out there on the ice in January 1986. The question is what it was waiting for. If this account stays with you, there are others like it, recovered from the margins of conflicts most people have already forgotten. Subscribe. The archive is deep,